I'm Carol Waller Pope, class of 1978. Sometimes I feel like one of the dinosaurs. I'm far from that. This is my first time, I have to tell you, being back in a classroom at Northeastern, and so it just reminds me of what a great place it is, one, to see all of you, and there's so many more women than when I was here. But when I hear Judge Roberts' story and think about my time at Northeastern, it's like my time at Simmons College down the road. Northeastern was always a very nurturing place and the right place for me to go to law school. But in my professional life, and I came to Northeastern to be a criminal lawyer because I grew up in the era of Perry Mason and F. Lee Bailey, and I just couldn't imagine not practicing criminal law. I never practiced a day of criminal law. So, you know, the roads traveled sometimes are unintentional or unknown at the time. But in my professional life, I moved to DC to practice government law, administrative law. And back then, government service wasn't cool like President Obama talks about, and it was just government practice. It wasn't, at least in my world, defined as public service as it is now, but public service is cool. And so I've been a career federal attorney my whole career, and I'm the first career employee of the Federal Labor Relations Authority to be nominated as a member. The Federal Labor Relations Authority has jurisdiction akin to National Labor Relations Board, and one of the NLRB regional directors is one of our alums, Marta, in Puerto Rico is a regional director there. But the Federal Labor Relations Authority is a small government agency, and we have the same jurisdiction as an NLRB, same organizational structure with members and a chairman and jurisdiction, but our jurisdiction is federal agencies, federal employees, federal unions. So worldwide, as I like to say, and the federal government is one of the largest employers in the world. But we practice labor law and labor relations for federal employees. And I was the first FLRA career employee to be nominated as a member, and the first career employee to become chairman, designated as chairman by President Obama. And I've served as chairman during his entire first term. And then my term ended, and so my biography, we struggled a lot to define myself currently because I have been renominated by President Obama, and I am awaiting another round, which will be my third time for Senate confirmation, being a Clinton appointee, a Bush appointee, and now Obama appointee. And it's never easy and never smooth and totally out of your control. So I am out of office awaiting a Senate confirmation.
So I'm Jackie Kugell. I'm a 1992 graduate. Interesting listening to you wanting to come here to be a criminal lawyer and doing something else. I came to Northeastern because I wanted to be a labor and employment lawyer. And I am a labor and employment lawyer. I've actually, I left Northeastern and with the help, truly, of everything I gained at Northeastern, I got a job with Morgan, Brown & Joy, which is labor and employment law firm supporting management, which I know was not something that made some of my professors at Northeastern all that happy at the time, and I was told in no uncertain terms that maybe I should wait to see if I could get a job on the right side. But it's a management side firm located in Boston, founded in 1923, if you can believe it. We are having our 90th anniversary in October. I have been there since 1992, which is stunning to think. We've been out of school, ladies, 21 years. And I was a partner who became a partner in 1999, and effective January 1st, 2014, I will become managing partner.
I'm Cindy Reed, and I certainly took the road less traveled, however you want to define it, because at the moment I'm not doing anything in the law, but I own and operate a company called LTR Holdings. I'm an angel investor in startup companies. I currently have investments in 9 different companies, and I've had many others over the course of time. I came to Northeastern really not knowing what I wanted to do, and left Northeastern in 1980 to join the firm of Edwards and Angel, thinking I would either be a corporate attorney or a litigator. And I spent a year doing both, and had decided at the end of that year that I wanted to be a full-time litigator. But the other 4 men that were in my class joining the firm were also litigators, and the firm had a great need in the municipal finance department. So I was recruited to work in the bond department, much to my dismay. I said to the then head of associates, I don't know anything about bonds except how to spell bond, so I don't really want to do this work. He said, I think you're going to like it. I said, no, I'm positive I'm not going to like it. I'm a litigator. And he said, listen, he said, first of all, you're going to go to the bond department, but secondly, I'll get you a bottle of scotch that you're going to like it. I said, name the brand. I'm going to, I'll be back in litigation before you know it. Well, 5 years later, I was still in the bond department and learned a great deal during my time there. I then left Edwards and Angel, went to Hasbro, which had just acquired the Milton Bradley company and was just starting a huge growth trajectory. I stayed 15 years at Hasbro, became the general counsel of Hasbro at a point in time, and then decided to go back to something that had been a hobby all the way through this period, which was angel investing, and see what I could do with it. And it has become my career and my passion at this point in time. So,
thank you all. So here is the question that we asked each of the panelists to respond to, in the hope that it would elicit information about what it took to break the various barriers that they broke. What was the defining moment that led each of you to the point in your careers that you're currently occupying? And then tell us a little bit about why that moment was so important in the development of your careers, and if you have any advice that flows from that. No doubt we would all be happy to hear that as well. So, Tracee.
Okay. Well, the defining moment for me did come when I had transferred to Bingham, but Bingham was my 3rd firm out of law school. I started out at the former Robinson & Cole here in Boston. I practiced in the corporate area. I did some employment work. It was actually in the days of the private law firms when I think associates had a little more flexibility, at least more than they do now in the large firms. I then went to a trust and estates boutique and practiced there for a while. Enjoyed that a great deal and got headhunted into Bingham. Did some different things there, and I was finishing up my 6th year. Loved it, really loved the firm. I was active with the Committee on Associates. I was doing pro bono work on the transactional side. And at the same time, I was wondering, am I going to make partner here? And I had always wanted to be a partner in a law firm. That was my goal from, I can remember thinking about that in junior high and high school. But I also, didn't quite feel like I necessarily had the sponsorship. It's tough when you move firms a couple of times. You move for good reasons, but you have to then deal with the cards that you've dealt yourself. And I got a fateful call one day from the HR department, and I thought, oh my gosh, why is the HR director calling me? And she said, your name's come up. The chairman is looking for someone to come work with him, an associate, in a new role. It'll be a director level role, but it will be really, helping manage his office, manage the chairman's office. And I always had liked our chairman a great deal. He was ambitious, interesting. He's actually going to be starting his 20th year as chairman later this year. And I was intrigued, so I got my resume together, and it came at just that right moment. I did feel like, to a certain degree, the heavens opened, and I got a little light shone down and a bit of a pathway. And I thought to myself, working with the chairman of something, anything can't be a bad thing. And when Rashmi and I were talking about, how is this a defining moment, it really was a point at which I decided I had to give up the practice of law in order to shift to the management side of the firm. And that was an identity crisis for me in some ways. But I calculated the downside risk and thought, well, I can always go back and practice if this doesn't work out. But this isn't a real opportunity, and what the heck? And it was a job that was one that I could help define. The main requirements were that I be willing to travel extensively. At the time, Bingham was growing through combination. Ended up being 10 combinations over 15 years, then 4 more international offices added organically after that. But the thing that I needed to do, frankly, was go all in and see if this was going to work. And he essentially said, see if you can make a job of this. And I thought, well, that's not very comforting, but I'm going to do that. And I have to say, on a personal level as well as a professional level, I really found just an incredible fit for me. And I think that's another important thing. You've got to be willing to take risks, and you have to know what your own strengths are so that when good opportunities come along, you can size them up and say, this one actually smells and feels like one that I could be really good at. After that, it takes a lot of perseverance, it takes a lot of tenacity and hard work, and we'll talk, I know more about that later, but my barrier-breaking opportunity there was this shift, and my first role for the chairman was really a chief of staff role for him, which at the time was nearly unheard of in large law firms. I did also say to Rashmi, though, I think for me at least, and I'm one of the younger ones here on the panel, relatively speaking, I don't know that I was the first, and I think that's a great thing. I think I'm in an early wave, but the fact that I'm no longer the first, I think is great news for everybody. It means there are more of us. There's more critical mass doing new things. So I'll pause there and let the other panelists speak some.
I have questions for you, however.
Oh, okay.
So the first question is, it's such an intriguing piece of advice to be open to risks. How do you plan for that?
You usually don't, right? But when your palms start to sweat a little bit, you feel a bit destabilized. Another thing we talked about, though, and I think all the panelists would agree, the world has gotten really complicated. The pace of change is something we talk about all the time in our firms. It's talked about all the time everywhere. And we also talk a lot, though, that change creates opportunity. And you've got to be willing to kind of roll with those punches, and I think more so now than ever before, because things are fast. You've got technology driving you hard every day. We're all trying to stay plugged in and do our jobs well and manage, our personal lives in some ways. But to me, the change piece is very tied with risk, which you're going to have to take some risks in some ways every day, probably more than before. So you have to get more comfortable with that. But one thing that I've always remembered, I was fortunate to play national level soccer in my high school and college days, and I had a terrific soccer coach who used to always say that the best players make decisions. You can always make another decision after that, but if you don't make a decision and take advantage of an opportunity at a certain point, don't think that it's going to come back around again. The world moves on, and maybe it'll come back if you're lucky, but you also have to jump and grab that brass ring occasionally, and then, hey, if it's all that you wanted it to be, good for you, and if it's not, well, you can make a new decision. But that to me is really something that has stayed and resonated with me all the way through my career.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another question for you. You had mentioned to me when we spoke that really it's kind of an unusual structure that you have at Bingham, where there is this CEO, right, who then brings along and sort of develops another person, perhaps as a successor, but certainly as somebody who's sort of involved in the business side of it. So I'd love it if you could just tell us if I've described this correctly and give us a little bit more information about that. But then the further, the second piece of this question is how important was his role, J. Zimmerman's role as a mentor for you? Was that a necessary piece of this puzzle to make it work for you? And was it irreplaceable in the sense that that's really the way, that's really what enabled you to be able to take the risks?
Yeah, I would say that I was very fortunate that, I mean, every now and then you get the opportunity to be on a terrific team or with particularly terrific individuals that you really gel with. And I would encourage everyone, when you get that good feeling and you know it's a good place for you, stay with it and take the ride, because my current boss is really an exemplary leader. We're very fortunate. He's visionary, he's a real humanist, and he gave me opportunities, and he believes very much in, you know, you hire good people, you let them run, you let them see what they can do. And he made me want to work hard for him. He made me want to grow and expand. And he's always been very complimentary, though, and said, well, you made yourself invaluable pretty quickly. And we talked about that, too, that, you know, you have to commit yourself. And organizations also, you know, you don't get there overnight. People are looking to see what your commitment level is. Are you there, you know, and it doesn't just mean day and night. It means over time. What, you know, are you going to stick with this organization? I think loyalty and relationships still matter a great deal, even in a world when people have a lot more jobs and a lot more careers than they might have had in decades past. But he recognized that I could do more, and he kept giving me opportunities. And you know, I was very fortunate in that regard. But I would say he wasn't just a mentor to me. Something Kelly and I talked about last night was he was a sponsor as well. So not just gave advice, but then put me into situations where I could take the next step. And those types of people in your career are extremely important. So when you get one and try to cultivate them, you know, push them. Say, I can do more. Can you give me something else? That's going to help you get better. And I think it was a real distinction for me.
Thanks, Tracee. One last question. What was the most difficult thing that you had to give up to be able to be where you are?
Personal time. The big jobs are big jobs. They take up a lot of your life, and we talk about, you know, work-life balance is not really that. We talk about work-life integration, and especially with, you know, BlackBerry devices and iPhones and all of this, that, and the other you got to take with you on vacations and to dinners and whatever. I think everyone has to find their own balance, and you've got to figure out what you want in your personal life, your family life, as well as your job, and get comfortable with that. Something that we talk about as well, you know, when we've got employees who aren't happy, whether they're associates or on the staff side, if you're not happy here, go be happy somewhere else. That's okay. But I think it gets back, again, really to that point around your own self-awareness. And you change, right? All through your career. There are parts of you that stay the same and grow and strengthen, and there are things that change for your, in terms of your own priorities. So I think staying self-aware around what you want, how you want it, when you want it, those are really important.
That's great, thank you. Kara, what was the defining moment in your career? We'll see how many times I can ask this.
About 2 more times. I had joined the FLRA because I wanted to return to Boston from Washington, D.C. You know, it's the fortune of an employee with me at Department of Labor said, you should talk to these guys. The FLRA was created by the Civil Service Reform Act of '78. So we were a new agency, new people. A lot of folks from NLRB had migrated to leadership positions at the FLRA. And so it was an energetic, young agency, and I was fortunate enough to get a job here in the Boston regional office. Young bosses, young leadership, and I was happy there. And I worked there for a number of years, and we got a new general counsel, which is also a presidential appointee confirmed by the Senate. Interestingly, it was someone who had worked in our Denver office as a regional attorney. I took an opportunity to go on a detail to the Denver office, you know, just on a fluke, say I'll go work there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They needed somebody to help with the backlog. And so I got to know him. I was also, and I think in part because my dad was a steel worker and I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I didn't grow up to be a labor attorney, but labor was always in my blood because I grew up in Pittsburgh, and if you turn on the local news, it's about the nurses' strike in some county in Pennsylvania. But he was a steel worker, and I knew when we, the family, were on strike, because we were on strike, and you know, resources were different when steel workers were on strike. But I got into labor, and I knew from my dad, I became the union steward for the attorneys of the FLRA. I was the local Boston union steward, and it was an interesting side job to my job, which was successful, and my young bosses were mentors in obvious ways and less obvious ways about my career and giving me opportunities. And so, you know, I had difficulty as a steward. I had difficulty with fellow employees who wanted to continue to smoke in the office when there was no, and they got mad at me as the steward that I didn't continue to fight to keep smoking in the office. It seems like that was light years away, and it was. But the general counsel from the, who became the general counsel from the office in Denver, who I worked with for just a 3-week detail, for the first time, he wanted to improve the labor relations within the FLRA, and he held a meeting with all the union stewards, brought us into DC to meet with him as a new young general counsel. He was appointed by President Clinton. And it was a contentious meeting, and I was fairly vocal about what was right and what was wrong in the agency. And you know, there were times, it was maybe a 3-day meeting, and a couple of times you go home at night, or you're with your fellow stewards and you're sort of hashing what went on in the day. And there were a couple of times when I wondered whether I was too vocal. I mean, he was the boss of the agency and certainly the boss of the attorneys. And the last day of the meeting, he called me into his office during a break. And I was like, okay, this is it. And much to my surprise, he invited me to come to DC and be his assistant, executive assistant. And it was an entry level, what we call in government Schedule C position, not presidential appointment, not Senate confirmed. And it was a risk for me because I was getting out of the federal service to take this job and to work with him. And it was somewhat undefined. The person who was in the Schedule C position to him before me, generally it was filled by someone from the administration who had been a lower level campaign worker who didn't have the chips to be an ambassador or to head an agency, who would get these Schedule C appointments. And for my boss, he had to hire a Schedule C that was referred to him from the White House. But she only stayed, and you know, the career people, she came in trying to tell us things or introduce new ideas. And so it wasn't a position that was necessarily favored by employees. And she only stayed about 6 months and left. And so it created a vacancy, and he felt he had already paid his dues to the White House. He could hire who he wanted. So he offered me this position, and he gave me all kinds of assurances because this was the end of Clinton's first term. And as a political person, if Clinton didn't win re-election, I would be out of a job. But he tried to give me assurances. We'll find you another place in the agency, maybe not back in the Boston office. We'll, you know, I'll look to take care of you. I'll take you where I go. You know, this kind of. I mean, it was a good, benevolent kind of approach that he was saying to me, come and join my team. And I have to say, even though he was from within the agency, he had introduced some new policies, some new ways of doing business, and he wasn't exactly popular among his former peers, peer group, the leadership of the FLRA. So it was a risk for me, but it was a defining moment because of the opportunity for me, like Tracee, was to join management and to join his management team. And there were times throughout my legal career that I thought about joining management, but you know, the FLRA office here in Boston were young managers. They weren't going to move on and create an opportunity until they were ready to retire 20 years later or so. So the opportunity would not have been in Boston, but I didn't have the mindset that you have to be willing to move necessarily for an opportunity or for an advancement, because it had been my mindset, and certainly maybe a generational thing, that you stay and you wait your turn. Personal life at the time, but I thought it would be nice to do something different. And I worried about losing the legal identity because I was going to become an executive assistant, and for some people, they didn't know what that meant. It wasn't a chief of staff title, but Joe had an administrative assistant, so I wasn't moving into a clerical position. And if I hadn't moved to Washington, I never would have been identified as someone who should be considered for the presidential appointment. And it was I learned a lot as his assistant for 4 years. And he came to me one day, and it may sound trite, but the whole inner goddess term, I want to redefine from 50 Shades of Grey to the little voice in your head. It's not just a sexual inner goddess, it's a business and a professional inner goddess that says, do you know what you're doing? Should you really consider this? What about all the risk? And every time I've had an opportunity to either break a barrier or a defining moment, it's because of some opportunity like Tracee, where someone came and said, you should try this, you should do this. So throughout my career, I moved from executive assistant, and one day Joe said to me, I want you to head up this new program. We're going to redefine how we review appeals of regional director dismissals, and I want you to be the new head of it. I was like, are you sure? It's been successful. And so there were defining moments like that where in each instance I was given an opportunity to do something certainly new for me, and at times I felt unprepared for it. But you look back and it's easier to connect the dots in a reflective moment than prospectively. And there were times when through volunteer activities at my alma mater, Simmons College, I got to practice leadership, because I didn't get to practice leadership in my job until I moved to Washington and became a part of management. So, I say to the younger women at Simmons, get involved, be it in your church, in your PTA, whatever the opportunity. You may feel like you'll never get an opportunity to be a leader in your professional life or where you are at that moment, but you can study and practice leadership in other ways that will then make you prepared when the opportunity presents itself in your professional life. So, from Joe putting us in talk masters and speech masters, and like, why the hell are, we're attorneys, even it's administrative law, you get to litigate, we don't need speech masters, we don't need to go out and cultivate a client base. We're the government. We're regulatory. They have to come to us. He recognized that we were going through a period of waning caseload and that we needed to make ourselves relevant. So I learned lessons from him, even though, he probably shy away from the term of being a mentor because he wasn't a warm and fuzzy or, fireside chat guy. But he would be somebody that you'd feel more like he was throwing you in unprepared. You should do this, you can do it. I want you to be the director of appeals. Then I started learning things and saying, well, everybody else who's had this job is not the director of appeals. They're assistant general counsel. Why don't I have that title as assistant general counsel? I want to be assistant general counsel. Because director, you have to define for people at times, but everybody in the legal world and in my agency understood assistant general counsel title. So it took me a couple of years to go in and make that speech to him, because I found that I could be successful and was successful as the director of appeals in just building a new program in the redefined way that he envisioned. But I just want to add one thing, because I don't want to take too much of my time answering the first question, but it sort of echoes what Judge Roberts said about, having other people tell your story and help you to jump over a hurdle or to achieve something. Because it is about your results, your outcomes. But I've heard other people, successful people speak about, you always have to have somebody in the room with the decision maker who's going to speak for you. In her case, Judge Clarence Thomas or others, Justice Thomas or others. But I recognized that there were instances where it wasn't just my balance sheet of strengths and weaknesses, my accomplishments, my outcomes, somebody had to be in the room saying she should be the one. Somebody was in the room with the Minority Recruitment Committee at Northeastern. I too went through the Minority Recruitment Committee at Northeastern. Joe was on that committee. Judge Brown, well, he was Professor Fred Brown at the time that I was here in law school, that went on to become a Massachusetts judge. And so there are times when you do things, and I say to the kids in my family, you know, you have to do things that you know are right from a character and integrity perspective, and not because somebody's watching and they'll keep a scorecard. You do it because you know it's right, because you never know who's watching. People in a room thinking about the vacancy that was coming up for a member, and never in my wildest dreams would I think that I would be nominated by a president, President Clinton at the time, to assume a federal position requiring Senate confirmation. Hell, I sat in my house and watched the Clarence Thomas hearings. You know, you think about how incredibly intrusive it is. You give up your privacy. You know, the FBI wants to talk to people that knew you in 6th grade. I'm like, I don't still know those people in 6th grade. You know, what did you ever do when, you know, from everything that you would think of, the drugs, your financial life, your everything. And I thought, why would anybody put themselves through that? Because I don't know if the rewards are worth it. But so the defining, there have been defining moments, and when we prepared in the pre-conference call, I thought about how do you pick one? Because I think everybody has defining moments, and just one thought that not all defining moments lead to success. I really think it's important sitting here that there's recognition that you can have a lot of defining moments in your life that you don't make you successful. And as part of the panel, maybe I chose a couple that made me successful, but that's not the gamut.
That's very funny because I have a follow-up question for you that may just push you to talk about that other side. One of the things that's already come through as a theme between what you and Tracee said is this ability to rely on your gut as well as on good advice, right? To be able to take advantage of opportunities even if they're risky. So the question that I was hoping that you could just take a minute to reflect on is, was there a time, and we don't need to hear the details if you don't want to share them, but was there a time when you followed your gut and it didn't work out?
When I became a member, and it was a pretty exciting time for me and my family because I waited a year for Senate confirmation from nomination to confirmation. It was in October, just before the Bush-Gore election, and it was, everyone said you're not going to, you know, they're not going to, the Senate isn't going to confirm any more Clinton nominees because it's too close to the election, and it did happen. But of the 3 members of the authority, only 2 can be from the same political party at any one time. So for the 8 years of the Clinton administration, there have been 2 Democratic members and a Republican. And so I walk into this tremendous opportunity. The election happens in November. The Supreme Court decision happens thereafter. And some of us still call it a disputed outcome. But my whole tenure starting out as a member was a part of a Republican administration that organized labor, did not support that administration. And my agency and our jurisdiction wasn't a part of the president's agenda, at least in terms of growth. I didn't start out thinking they would look to put us out of business, but one of the Republican members became chairman. And for my 8-year tenure, we were a very different agency. And there were times when I was once again vocal about what was wrong with the agency in terms of not filling positions. It became an agency not held in high esteem like it had been by our stakeholders. And internally, employees were dissatisfied, disorganized, troubled. I was a member, a part of the leadership, and a couple of people, and I've been a career person, so I knew people, I had relationships, would say to me, look, you know, we just want somebody to tell us where the agency's headed. We have this, you know, the Republican chairman has indicated that we're not on board with this new agenda, new leadership. Mind you, I don't have a political background. I hadn't worked in campaigns. I hadn't lived a political life. And this was a secretary of the agency, and she said, we just want somebody to turn on the lights and tell us where the agency's headed. And it was so remarkable to me, the terms that she used. And so internally in leadership meetings, I would raise questions and take positions opposite the leadership. And one of my fellow members, the other Republican, said to me, you know, you really should just be quiet. If you want to be renominated by the Bush administration, it would be in your favor to just go along. Yes, you're right. We had more leadership and more collaboration among the leadership and more openness and more direction for employees under the prior administration. And yes, that's how it should be, but there's a different chairman, there's new leadership, and you should just go along to get along. And I didn't, but the bad part of that was when my term was up and it was still the Bush administration, the Bush White House made it clear that they didn't want me, that we'll hire our own Democrat, we'll find our own Democrat. I went to an interview for White House presidential personnel, which is part of the protocol, and it was just a check the box interview. It was very clear, it was just a check the box. And at the end of the interview, she said to me, you know, President Bush doesn't really like reappointments. He likes to hire new people, and I said, how could that be true? The Republican at my agency has been renominated twice by President Bush. So once again, maybe being more vocal than I should be. But something interesting happened. So, you know, his words telling me I should just be quiet, I'm going to be renominated as the Democrat in the Republican administration, were really true. And it's advice I didn't follow, and there were many a day that I regretted it. But an interesting thing happened, because after that interview in the White House, and I knew I wouldn't be renominated by the Bush administration. They were very clear, we don't want you, you will not be renominated. What they didn't do was to push me out. They just let me stay because they didn't really care that there was a minority member, a Democrat in the Republican administration. What happened was that the Democrats took back the Senate. And of course, this is a position that requires Senate confirmation. So I was disappointed that I hadn't heeded the advice. But I got back in the Republican administration because the Democrats took back the Senate. And Senator Harry Reid's office contacted me and said, we want you to be our Democrat. We don't care what the Bush administration says. They've got to understand they are Democrats. And so it was disappointing to me that the president didn't want me, but I did.
So, Jackie,
Yes.
what was the defining moment in your career?
You know, it's very interesting, I said this on our call, and I've been reflecting on it since we had our call about a month or two ago, and I don't have a moment. And the moments actually were very early. Joining a firm, when I joined my firm, there were 16 lawyers. We're now well over 30. It was very partner heavy. I knew that I was interested in the work, but what I didn't understand at all was the whole sort of business side of being in private practice. And very soon began to understand that, oh, I get it. Being a lawyer is just sort of part of the deal here. I have to actually go figure out how I ultimately grow a business, something I didn't know. And I have to say that I had a number of fabulous mentors within the partnership who helped me see different things that were open to me. And soon what I found was that one way to get your name out there is to speak and to write and I found that I really enjoyed it, and I found that I very much enjoyed particularly speaking about a topic that I enjoyed in front of a number of large groups of people, and that's a good thing. Just sort of serendipitous that it's good that I liked that. And I remember sort of thinking that the one moment that I can think of is I was presenting to a large group. It was the Marriott Ballroom, Associated Industries in Massachusetts, variety of their constituency. There's several hundred people there, and I thought, wow, this is really fun. This is something that I want to do. And honestly, it wasn't anything that I sort of visualized as part of the practice of law. So I would say that was sort of one early. But then I had another issue, which is I really wanted a family. I wanted to start a family, and I started being worried that, well, I liked both the practice of law, and now I figured out that I like this marketing, and I've been given these opportunities by a number of the partners in the firm. I started thinking, okay, but I need to figure out how to balance this a little bit, because I want to have children, and I want to figure out how to do that. And I would say the second defining moment is sometime in the employment law world in the mid to late 90s, you started seeing a growth in the area of employment law training. And so what I saw was, wow, this is the thing that I figured out that I sort of kind of like. We don't have any formalized kind of training group or training unit. It is something that our clients are looking for. And I went to the partners and said, I'd like to figure out how we can make this part of the service and the practice. And they said, that's great, go write a business plan. And I thought, what's a business plan? So I literally, I remember this, I went to Barnes & Noble, like in the section that said business, and I found a book, yes, books, like not online, books, and found a business plan to model it after, and presented a business plan to the partnership as an associate, and said, this is something I would like to do, and they said, great, go do it. And so for me, that was another way of sort of figuring out, okay, more stuff I like, more ways to build my practice. And then I'll say on the latter side of that, what I started figuring out is, okay, it's great, this training stuff's really working, I'm still advising clients, I'm still litigating, but what I found was I actually wasn't kind of giving myself more of that balance. Instead, I was actually growing. And I thought, well, this isn't actually how I thought this was going to work out. So I actually did apply for a job, and I went on an interview, and I'll never forget it. I spent 45 minutes selling what I was doing, and unbeknownst to myself, selling my firm. At the end of the interview, this very nice general counsel looked at me and said, I'm not really sure why you're here, because it sounds like you really like where you're working right now. And I thought, I do, I really do. And it was sort of at that moment that I figured out, okay, I need to figure out how to balance my life a little bit more. I don't need to leave what I'm doing. I just need to learn how to balance it myself a little bit more. And so I would say that there are a number of sort of moments like that, and I could go on more, and I won't, but to say that there wasn't, I don't think of one particular date or moment. I think it's sort of that I rolled from kind of moments to moments.
That absolutely requires me to ask you the following question. So we've been hearing about risk taking, and you've put on the table this thing that I have struggled with myself, and I bet others in the room, so many others have as well, which is, what about the risk that you take when you decide to reorganize your own life, right, and balance in such a way that you might be impinging on your career? So can you just talk to us about what made you comfortable doing that, whether there were any protections that you put in place, how successful you were?
Now I have a defining moment. And this is a totally true story. I was talking to somebody about it last night at our dinner. It was, I can tell you the year, it was 2000. I was a partner in a firm, in a firm. And taking a case to trial in the Federal District Court of Boston, and all of our witnesses were in Philadelphia. And my husband was in retail management and had really been sort of climbing the retail management life. And he, I don't know that it matters, but I'll just say he works for an office supply company in retail. And back to school is a very big time for that retail store. And so he's all in the fall. Our trial was starting the first week of October. And at the time, we had a 4- and a 2-year-old. And we had just decided that we were going to figure it out. We were going to just figure it out. He hadn't slept for weeks on end. I hadn't slept for weeks on end. I was trying to travel back and forth. And the short story is that we left our children at the daycare until 9 o'clock at night, and the police came. It's not exactly what you want to have happen as you're trying to figure out how you balance your life. And so we decided that weekend that this was not actually working. So we took the risk. And decided that we had to reformulate our lives. And there are moments that I'll tell you that I feel like, and particularly when my kids were in elementary school and I saw a lot of stay-at-home moms getting very involved in schools and the school being very jealous, there were times that I actually thought, well, I really got the short end of the stick, because I stayed in my business and we decided that we were going to hitch our wagon to my practice, and he was going to take an enormous step back, which he did, and he has for several years. I was worried about that because I was worried about him and whether that was the right thing for him. I was petrified about the notion that now everything is really on me. And then at moments I was honestly resentful that, I don't have the ability to, go into the classroom and do library day and all those other things. But I think actually the risk in the end, the way we decided to reformulate, was worth it and wonderful. I mean, I have a 16-year-old daughter now who it doesn't occur to her at all that this crazy life we lead is something that she can't do. And obviously my son sees the same thing. And so I think
One more question for you, Jackie. Is there, we're also getting the sense, I think, from this panel that so much of the succession path is from being in the moment. Is there any advice, just looking back now, that you would have given yourself?
that is one thing that I thought about. Like, what if I had been sitting, well, I'll just say that the rooms at Northeastern when I was here didn't look like
Should have been here at 80.
Yeah. But if I put myself back at Northeastern and could have my 45-year-old self be whispering in my 20-something ear, what would I say? And I would say they're actually really incredibly basic, simple stuff. Like, be yourself and be confident, and remember that everybody out there is completely and utterly insecure too. So it's all right. Like, when you're looking at somebody who's like, wow, you know what? They have moments where they're self-doubting as well. Don't be afraid of hard work. I mean, it's hard, and nobody's going to give you a pass just because you are. You got to do the work, and you got to perform, and you got to deliver. And and then the last thing though is, well, there's two of the last things. One is pick something you enjoy, because it makes the hard work that much easier. I mean, if you don't like it, then it stinks to have to do all the hard work. And then Tracee said it, but roll with the punches. I mean, things just do not work out the way you think they're going to. And I had that episode of my daughter screaming last week because her birthday didn't work out the way it was supposed to, and it's just like, roll with it. That's the way it goes. Like, you just gotta move through it, and you'll figure it out. And the problem solving that you gain as a result of rolling with those punches actually gives you that much more confidence the next time the thing doesn't happen the way it's supposed to. So it's nothing profound. It's something that all of us sort of know when we sit back and reflect. It's just hard to remember.
Cindy.
The cleanup battery. Do you want to ask the question? defining moment, and I'm old enough that I've had many. But I'll actually speak of three that have happened to me, and I'll tell you why I consider them to be defining, and I'll move pretty quickly through them. But the first was the bottle of scotch episode and going to the bond department that I alluded to earlier. And I really was very discouraged about that, because it had taken me a long time to figure out that I really wanted to commit myself to litigation. So this was such a departure. I knew nothing about it. I was scared to death. There was even a visual to this whole thing, because my office had been on the top floor of the firm and the bond department was on the bottom floor of the firm. So I had to pack up all my little things and move down to, Siberia and undertake this assignment. And on the first day, somebody said, well, here's all the documents, and they gave me a stack this tall of trust indentures and all kinds of things that I'd never seen before and didn't understand, and threw them at me, and I was supposed to get underway. So it took me a while to really understand that there was a good part to this. And once I sort of let go of my anger, I guess, at not being able to follow the path that I had set out for myself, I started to learn some of the things that would become very important to me in the rest of my career. So the first thing was not being daunted, figuring out that you can actually learn something new and be okay with it. And I set about doing that. So, I started wading my way through the documents. I figured out, yes, I can actually swim, now that I've been thrown into this pool. And I'll, start learning whatever it is that I need to learn. I also got a really important mentor in the firm at that moment in time, because it turns out the head of the bond department was far and away the biggest business getter in the firm at that moment in time, and he went to bat for his people. So, you were going to kill yourself working for this man, and I did. On the other hand, I got somebody who was going to step up to the plate, and I learned what it was like to do that, both, having him support me, but also learning how to support other people. I learned to run a team, because I was doing deal work, and you have to pull a team together in order to get these deals done. And as I progressed, I learned how to do that, and how to manage a team, and how to manage complex problems through to the end. So there were a lot of good things that came out of that, and some of those are what made me stay with it as long as I did. So that's one. Two, fast forward, I'm now at Hasbro. I'm an assistant vice president in the legal department. The company is growing by leaps and bounds. It started with the Milton Bradley acquisition, but it then started acquiring a number of other companies. And at a point in time, my sort of peer group was going to be promoted to vice president, which had a lot of things that came with it and was kind of a marker in your career. The legal department at that time had a general counsel for whom I worked, and then I can't remember what his title was at that moment in time, but a lawyer who had worked on the outside for the company, but that was brought in essentially over the general counsel to be the sort of, head person. And both of these gentlemen were not all that old at the time when all this was coming along, but I thought, okay, I'll be working my way up and see where this takes me. So everyone else in my peer group was promoted, and I was not. And I was not, I think, for the reason that my boss, the general counsel, really didn't like having all this hierarchy. He had had somebody brought in over him, so he wanted everybody else to be sort of on this level field. And despite the fact that everybody else in the company and my peers thought I should get this promotion, I was not promoted. So I really had to step back and say, is this the organization for me? I just don't know whether or not I can stay here. I don't know how decisions are being made. I'm really, concerned about this, and this may be a time when I should just, pick up and leave. And I thought very seriously about leaving the company at that moment in time, and I You know, I would walk in the morning and I would say to myself, well, today's the day. I'm going to go in and tell them I'm leaving. And I'd go back and forth on it. And just at the moment in time when I thought I was going to pull the plug on that decision, I walked into my office and my boss, the general counsel, called me in and he told me he was leaving the company. And not only that, his boss would be leaving the company also in a very short period of time. So all of a sudden, this whole sort of, you know, all these barriers got cleared. They were going to look for a new general counsel. I was pretty young at the time, but I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to go for it. So I went in, I knocked on the CEO's door, and I said, I just want you to know, I'm interested in this. And he said, okay, thank you for telling me this. And the long and the short, you know, I ended up ultimately, you know, moving into that job. And I think what I learned in that moment is the power
of small agency. So I wasn't just a rabble-rouser for no reason. I considered myself the champion of the career employees, and I was their voice because they didn't have a voice. And, you know, I look back on it, though, and think about how I might have done things differently. And, you know, you can't underestimate or undervalue the power of relationships and building relationships and the art of communication. And so the end of the story is, during my tenure as chairman, we got rewarded by those that run the federal survey as the most improved small agency, 250% increase in employee satisfaction, 450% increase in effective leadership, but the moments of undervaluation test you. And sometimes you recover and sometimes you don't, or you learn lessons or you move on, because clearly, I mean, I was the career employee that had some regard for having grown up in the agency and known the work and had good relationships with our clients, customers, agency heads, and the like. And so to sort of be farmed down into hinterland for 6 or 7 years was sort of a daily undervaluation. And, you know, my work with it, did our cases, did the most cases, and powered through it to grab that phrase. But you can go through some low periods of really questioning yourself and questioning what role you have. And I don't think it ends because you move on or move up.
Time for one more question as my assumption. Yes.
So the panel is called Breaking Barriers. I'm curious, in your experience, you have lots collective, really interesting and a lot of years of experience. Would you say that women still feel like it's breaking a barrier, or do you feel like the playing field has leveled over the perspective of, you know, the number of years that you've been practicing?
I actually think that it's still breaking barriers in a lot of cases. I have to tell you, I see that a lot. I'm some days very discouraged by the fact that conversations that were going on, you know, 20 or 25 years ago are the same conversations that are going on today, and how hard it is for women in a variety of places to really, you know, move on. And I have to tell you, I don't think that women help other women as much as they should. I think we hear about that from time to time, but I would certainly, you know, say from, you know, the perch that I have at this point, we've got to do a lot better job, sisters, I'll tell you, and, you know, supporting women and helping to, you know, make sure these barriers are broken, and the ones that are broken stay broken. So,
I think it depends what barriers you're talking about. Some, I think, are broken. When I started practicing, we couldn't wear pantsuits. We can wear pantsuits today, thank God. But I think it's better. But I don't think it's broken. I don't think the barriers are broken. I think it's much more that are flexible with women's schedules relative to maternity leaves and working from home and those and part-time schedules. I think it's better in a way that probably wasn't available when I started practicing in 1992. But I don't think it's fixed, and I also think it's anecdotal, meaning better here, not better there.
You know, in my life as chairman, my senior team are all women, and sometimes I sit in the meeting that I chair and I look around and I'm really, wow, it's all the senior leadership of the agency are women, and we're doing a great job. We're now number 7 instead of 34th among employee satisfaction among small agencies. But you know, I also know that there continue to be barriers. All too often, I'm the only African-American leader in a room of other deputy secretaries and assistant secretaries dealing with labor management and labor relations in the federal sector. And so it's, you know, you define barriers differently. And there's a lot of progress that's been made, but I think we all contribute to breaking barriers in small ways and larger ways.
So thank you to all 4 of you, and please join me